Good evening. I'm Joanne Williams. Welcome to Beyond the Virus and the Protests. This is the Black Nouveau special. As the coronavirus has changed the world in which we all live, so have the protests and the demands for justice sparked by the murder of George Floyd. You know, changes can be very scary and very stressful, and that's why we're here tonight. Talking about mental health is sometimes considered taboo in the African American community. Well, we have 4 therapists with us tonight who will show why that tool is needed to maintain our sanity and our tranquility. During the next hour, we're going to hear from them about ways to cope with today's challenges and uncertainties. Joining me is the panel moderator, Dr. Kweku Ramel Smith. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great and ready and excited about this program. I'm just very excited that Black Nouveau has this platform and for us to be able to share our little bit of knowledge with the people.
Well, let's start with this question, and we've talked about this before. What is mental health and what is good mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whenever we talk about mental health, we have to be very careful about how we explain it because most people equate mental health with mental illness. And that's why we don't want to talk about mental health because we say, there's nothing wrong with me, or I'm not crazy. I don't need to see anybody. There's nothing wrong with me. We just enumerate that point. But when we talk about mental health, it's a spectrum. On one end is illness, and those are the things that sometimes we have to deal with, those psychosis issues. But on the other end of that spectrum is what we call wellness, and that's the things that makes us well, that makes us great. So it's about being preventative in our mental health to make sure everything is great. So when we talk about mental health, we want to make sure we look at that spectrum from illness to wellness, but make sure we're doing more things on the front end.
What sort of goals do you have for tonight's discussion?
You know what? It's a few things we want as the panelists. We've talked about it, we've discussed it, and what we want to do is to be able to bring a conversation that's been talked about, but talk about it in a different way where people come out refreshed and renewed, understanding that mental health, having a provider is actually something great, but being able to look at it within the frame, specifically within that African diaspora, where you say, how can we talk about this where it relates to me?
Let me ask you one more question. Do you know sometimes that you are having a problem with mental health? Or does it come as a surprise sometimes?
It's a combination. You know, sometimes other people who are close in your life can maybe see it, but then sometimes we're very good at wearing masks in this world. And so those are the times where we know that we're doing something we're not supposed to, feeling things we're not supposed to. The question is, can we have the courage and the fortitude to go out and seek that help? And can we have people who can truly help us in a way that will help us move the needle?
Well, I want everybody watching tonight to remember that this is a conversation among informed friends. It doesn't infer a therapeutical relationship with these experts. But if the words resonate with you, may feel that you might need some help, please seek a culturally competent professional and they will be able to help you. Now we're going to hear a little introduction from each of our panelists and then we'll talk a little bit more with Dr. Smith. After that, we're going to move to a general discussion and we'll also include some of your questions. Now let's meet our first panelist, Arnita Holloman, a licensed professional counselor.
I'm Arnita Holloman, a licensed professional counselor. From COVID-19 to police brutality, we are seeing Black men, women, and children dying at disproportionate rates at the hands of a system that is built on racism and white supremacy, be it from disparate negative health outcomes to public execution in the street. Our nation is in crisis, and this crisis is hundreds of years in the making. We are seeing civil unrest, not only locally, but nationally and globally. And community members and community leaders are on the front lines fighting these injustices. They're organizing, protesting, making demands, and making every attempt that they can to help others heal. But how do they heal in the middle of this crisis while they too may be experiencing the same experiences and enduring pain from systemic violence, racism, structural violence, and systematic injustice? We're going to talk about some of these things.
Now, Dr. Smith, what are your thoughts along with Arnita?
You know what? I mean, she said it right off the bat. She talked about white supremacy and racism, wasn't afraid to talk about, you know, that elephant in the room sometimes. So the first question I pose to Arnita is, you know, when excuse me, when we look at it, we always talk about these things that are blind and these things that are blatant when we look at overt and covert racism. I want you to talk about those ways that we see the covert and overt racism affect our mental health today.
So, covert and overt racism both have an impact on our mental health and our well-being. And the trauma, racial trauma, is where we see or experience psychological symptoms that are connected to racism and discrimination. And so we may see some of the same kinds of symptoms related to like depression or anxiety, depending on the experience, PTSD. So we're going to see some of the same manifestations as a result of racism, whether it be covert or overt. And also there's research that talks about our mental health and well-being, how it's impacted just from having the hypervigilance around being concerned that you're going to be discriminated against.
So when we look at that, we look at our melanated skin and we wonder, why does it create this fear and this ferocity between authority figures? Can you tell us why?
Well, so authority figures, say more when you say authority figures. Which authority?
When we talk about like specifically with police brutality, those who have the ability to put some type of control over us.
Yeah, so one, we have to think about where did these, how are these systems built? Every system in America, every institution in America was built on a foundation of racism and white supremacy. And when we think about policing in America, it was born out of the slave patrols. And so its original intention was to oppress. And so we have to grapple with the fact that we are still seeing some of those oppressive tactics being used now, and obviously not in every police department, not with every police person. However, it is happening. And so if we couple that with long held stereotypes and misunderstandings and racist ideologies and policies that have a racist foundation, and you put all that together, that's a perfect storm for continuing to oppress communities of color.
And so when I look at this, I know you're on the ground, fields and everything like that. So how do you see the mental health wear and tear, not only on those who experience this trauma, but also the organizers from the grassroots levels to those who are actually the leaders in the community that's trying to stop it?
So I'm absolutely seeing and hearing from folks who are in the community doing amazing work. And whether that's leading protests or that's organizing cleanups or that's organizations that they work with that are doing the work, or that's other therapists, and they are feeling the pain of this. And we cannot separate our Blackness and our experiences as Black people from the work that we do. And so the hard part is we are trying to help our people be liberated. We're trying to help people heal, and at the same time try to work through that and heal for ourselves. The difficulty is in healing from something that is still going on. And so we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, that's because the trauma has stopped, but we are experiencing a trauma that has not stopped for hundreds of years for Black people in this community. And so we have to figure out ways that we can work on ourselves and stay well and also connect with others. And that community healing is extremely important because we are tribal people.
So talk about that real quickly. When we talk about this compound trauma and things we have to do to keep sane in the midst of it, what are a few tips that you can give people to just keep their sanity in the moment of it?
So definitely taking the time to breathe. Sometimes we, underestimate the value in breath until we don't have it, or until we're marching in the streets because it was taken from someone. And so we should take that moment as many times as we need to just stop and have a deep breath. Definitely meditation, prayer. If you have a particular spiritual or religious practice, faith practice, you want to do that. Connecting with close others, doing things that you find joy, that brings you joy. And if you're starting to feel like depressive symptoms or something, you may not want to do those things, but it's important to push yourself to do them because you will reap the benefits from it.
Oh, thank you, Sister Arnita. See, Joanne, I told you they're in for something special. I can keep this interview going. I know we got to get to our next panelist, but I hope the people are enjoying what you're hearing because you're getting some great information off the bat.
Well, Alfonso Watkins is waiting in the wings now. He's a clinical psychologist, and let's have a little introduction to him.
First thing I must always do is give honor and praise to our Creator for creating us out of His image and in her likeness and giving us the breath of life and opportunity to live another day. And secondly, I must give honor and praise to our ancestors, male and female, who sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears so we may enjoy some of the freedoms that we have here in this stolen land. Once again, I am truly honored to be part of this panel and have a discussion on racism and the impact that it is having on the circumstances that we are facing now. My name is Alfonso Watkins. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist here in Milwaukee. I have over 25 years of experience working in Milwaukee County. And the lens that I'm going to be speaking from is out of a Black African developmental psychology perspective. And basically what that means is that I'm going to be attempting to help individuals understand how we as the ascendants of kidnapped and enslaved Africans have evolved under the conditions of racism and oppression in this country. And from a historical perspective, bring it to the present to help individuals once again understand the impact of internalized racism and how our trauma is a continuous historical trauma. So once again, I am truly honored to be part of this panel and look forward to sharing this information with the community. One love and safe travels.
Kweku, he talked about the historical perspective. Will the two of you talk a little more about that, please?
Yeah, you know what? When I heard this, I was just so excited because so oftentimes in class we hear about manifest destiny, but we don't hear about colonization and imperialism within the American context. And what I want Brother Alfonso to talk about, what has this land, this indoctrination from this colonized state done to the African mind and consciousness?
What has happened to those of us who have had to live under these conditions, it has created a human being that is they've taken us out of our original state of being. And what that means is we are practicing a Eurocentric perspective or Eurocentric cultural foundation, once again, but we're Africans. So in that concept, we are in a continuous state of, it's called dual consciousness, where we are functioning or attempting to function as Africans, but we're being forced to function as Europeans. And that creates, once again, a bipolar disorder in us, a bipolar circumstances where we're constantly trying to navigate through two cultures. So as we begin to have this conversation from a historical perspective, this understanding that when we are being socialized, the socialization is a European social construct.
See, I love how you talk about that. And I've heard you speak before, and I hear you talk about things like linguistic amnesia. And you talk about how do we awaken that hidden cellular DNA from our African roots that has been suppressed by the socialization here. How do we awaken that DNA?
I think it's critical that the higher learning institutions and the school systems understand that it's important that those of us who are the descendants of kidnapped and enslaved Africans, we can't continue to be judged and gauged by comparing us to Europeans or comparing us to any other ethnic group, because we're the only one that have experienced what we have experienced. So our children, and even those of us who are adults, have to understand we need an African-centered perspective, an African-centered curriculum, an African-centered reality, once again, to improve our perspectives of ourselves, to have a positive self-worth, a positive self-image, have a positive self-identity. All that comes out of an African-centered paradigm. Now, once again, that does not mean that we are attempting to go back to Africa, but what that does mean is that we have or need to be able to be self-determined, being able to define ourselves under the circumstances that we live in under. So when we start talking about systemic and structural and institutional racism, when it comes to the higher learning component, we definitely have to look at the way the history has been shown. It continues to denigrate the contributions of what Africans have done on not only in America, but on the planet.
So when you look at like books like The Falsification of the African Conscience by Amos Wilson or The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, I think it stems into what we talk about, this internalized racism coined by the sociologist Karen Pike, where she talks about we internalize this oppression of racial subordination, this conscious and unconscious support of a social hierarchy. How do we really dig deep into understand that what we are is beautiful? James Brown said, I'm Black and I'm proud. How do we get back into that revolution of self-love?
Once again, it goes back to the concept of us being able to take control of the narrative of our experience here in America. us being able to define what it means or what it is to attempt to function in racism. I think our European family is going to have to become more aware and become more respectful of those of us who are experts in the field, so that we can begin to take control of the conversation, where we define what our experience has been under racism. So since Wisconsin has identified racism as a health crisis, I think once again, we need to define what that crisis is. And when you brought up the falsification of consciousness, Dr. Amos Wilson was articulating that what has happened is Europeans have created the environmental and social conditions that we live under, then they come in and diagnose it, then come up with the treatment. And we can't continue to function like that moving into the 21st century. We have to be able to define and articulate what our experiences is, and the Europeans are going to have to respect that and move that into the structures of these institutions.
So I want to ask you one last question as we wrap up on this panel. We talk about this internalized racism, what we have to do for a person who's hearing this for the first time, who's been trained to believe that something is wrong with African and an African mindset. What is the first thing you would introduce to them to be able to begin that healing process?
The healing process starts with, once again, and I think this is not just for African Americans, I think this is for everybody on the planet. We have been, the image of us has once again been destroyed, and we have many of us also have bought into that we are inferior. And so we have to get to a place, once again, where the truth is being told about the reality of who we are and what we were doing prior to us being kidnapped and stolen from Africa. We were not swinging for trees. We were not running around half naked. We had civilizations. We had family structure. We had a society where there was a structure for stages of development. So once again, the image that has been portrayed of us is the truth is going to have to be told. And the beauty of who we are, we have still been able to produce positive and productive human beings under these dehumanizing conditions.
Royalty and loyalty inside our DNA. I love it, brother. So we got one more, Sister Joanne, Queen Mother. Let's go to our last panelist before we really get it rolling.
Yes, well, let's hear a little bit from Simone Kilgore, who's a licensed professional counselor. She's with us too.
Hey, you know what? This is one of my favorites.
Simone Kilgore, licensed professional counselor, as well as a licensed cosmetologist. We're going to be talking about our resilience, the history of African Americans and how we got to this country, our contributions to this country and the communities in which we live and serve, and how as a community we build stronger relationships and stronger connection with each other in order to move forward and beyond some of the things that we have experienced as a people. I want to share a lot of information with you about our community hubs in terms of our churches, our salons, our community businesses, coffee shops, playgrounds, where we get together and talk a lot about Black resilience, how it is that we made it over, how we've made it through, and how we can continue to stick together and build on that resilience like our ancestors and move forward in life in a way that is beneficial and helpful for us all. Please join us in the conversation, share your information and your questions and any opinions you may have about our resilience and how we've made it through. Yet we still rise. Thank you.
And we will be taking some of your questions in just a few minutes. First of all, Dr. Smith, what would you and Simone Kilgore like to emphasize?
Well, you know what? I think she stated it from the get-go about these great hubs that we have. Sometimes we forget because we haven't sought out mental health places. We've always had a de facto mental health place, and we've had our churches, we've had our community clubs, but we've also had our barbers and our salons. And this is why I'm so excited about Simone, because she's been a double psychologist, because she told you that she does hair and she works on the mind. So I want to ask you this first question, Simone. When you talk about, you ended with "yet we still rise," tell me where that came from.
I think even, at the time I said it, it was just something that's in the underbelly, something that floats around between us as people who are descendants from Africa. We have a story, a history of rising out of the ashes, or for lack of a better term, being that phoenix being that sun that rises on the next day after we've gone through something tumultuous. And I don't know if anybody can identify the way that we have with historical trauma in the way that we have and still stand up and look the way we do and walk the way we walk and motivate the way we motivate and cultivate the way we cultivate. I don't know of another people who have done it quite the same way with the same type of style and grace that makes our European brothers and sisters love our culture, adopt, steal, and utilize our culture. And so, yes, we rise and we will continue to rise because we are attractive in that way. Our resilience is attractive.
And that's where I want to go to next, because when we talk about that resilience, we've overcome a lot of things we should not have had to overcome. So tell me what it is about the beauty and the gift of resiliency inside of our people and that burden that we have to carry with it.
It is such a burden. It is a burden, and it is a burden that feels me and feels all of us in a way that is so heavy, sometimes unrecognizable. I think Dr. Alfonso spoke about those of us that are not aware, that walk around without this true identity of knowing who we are. Yes, I may not know everything about my history and my ancestors, but inside of me, I know that I have this resilience because I've tried to fight it. I've tried to say, oh, I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of trying to fit in, figure it out, fight for my voice to be heard. You get tired of it. But at the same time, while we carry that burden, there's a beauty in having that experience that I want us all to be soaked in. Not just the burden of it, but the beauty of being able to wake up after something and figure out how to deal with it and call on friends and loved ones and other people, my people, and say, wow, I made it through. And now I want to help you make it through, and then continue on that way. Yeah, we get tired of carrying the load, but I don't really know what other choice we have.
And, you know, I love when you talk about we get tired of carrying the load. And I think one of the beauties is that community that we had, and that goes back to those hubs. Tell me why these hubs are so special and how they are even more special today than maybe in times in the past.
Yeah. And I like how you framed it even more important today. I think they're important today because I think people don't recognize them as much. And that could be my view of it. But I know growing up, going to the salon with my mom, understanding what it felt like when women left the salon, it was more about that inner change, that inner transformation that I saw when a woman walked in the salon and walked out, and what that did for her. On the outside, yeah, it was a beautiful transformation, whether it be hair, makeup, or whatever. But at the same time, knowing that you have support in those hubs where you can whisper in somebody's ear, you can cry, you can laugh, you can joke, you can talk about your own family, and they know you love them and you're going home to be with them. But at the same time, it meant somebody else on the planet gets what I'm saying, supports me, and this is a safe place to share and just be me. We all need a safe place to just be me. So our salons, our barbershops, our churches, our basement parties, I don't know, the basketball court, where brothers sat on a stoop, you know, and talked and chopped it up after work. Wherever that place is for you, you know, we find it fun is where we are more like ourselves. And who doesn't authentically want to be? I heard my sister Arnita speak about congruence. I want to be in line with my spirit, the spirit of my ancestors, and who I am now and where I'm going. I don't want to have to try to fit in these hodgepodges all over. It's too disconforming. And it's too confusing for a person to carry.
I want to take you out on this question right here, because we talked about these hubs, these communities, these families outside of our families, but everybody will say, you know, it starts at home. Won't you give us some of those wisdom and jewels that you learned from your mama, your mama's mamas, and your mama's mama's mama that was passed down?
I know one of the things I'll never forget is my mother would always talk about faith, focus, and follow through. And I know I share it a lot, but her faith, our faith, the faith that we have as a people, carried us. The faith where an enslaved woman had to give up her son. She had to pick which one to give up. And she believed and had a faith that he's going to be all right and I'll see him again. I don't know faith stronger than that. It gives me chills now talking about it. So about faith and focus. What is your focus? What are your goals? What do you want? And what do you want for your people? And then the follow through is the leg work. Put your feet down, put your hands on, like Arnita and Dr. Alfonso spoke. What do you want to do in the community? Whether it's pray for somebody, feed somebody, march, organize, I don't know what it is, but the follow through is so important. And all three of those things go hand in hand. So for me growing up, I knew keep my head up, I can be heard and seen, and it's okay to be who you are.
Queen Joanne, you know what? I'm full already, so I can't wait to get to this next round. This is really exciting for me to be able to listen to other professionals, because sometimes people say, "Well, what do you do as a licensed professional?" And this is what I do. When I hear them talk, this builds me up in a different type of manner. So I'm excited, and I want you to continue with this next round of questions as we go into it.
Okay, well, let me start with Arnita. Let me ask you a question. A lot of people need mental health services right now. Are there social agencies that can assist them in this time?
Absolutely. So a lot of therapists are seeing their caseloads increase significantly as a result of both COVID-19 and the protests and civil unrest that we're seeing. There are definitely places that they can go. The county behavioral health system has, numbers that you can call there. There's actually a website that lists some Black therapists, both in Wisconsin and Milwaukee. Wisconsin and in Milwaukee and Minnesota, I'm sorry. It's the Mary Ellen Strong Foundation. There is a collective of Black therapists here in Milwaukee. So there are a number of places that people can go. If they have insurance, they can look on their insurance, the back of their insurance card, and you can always ask someone. And so there are a lot of places that people can go. I want people to know that it's okay to start wherever you are. It's okay that you didn't start before, but you can start now seeing a therapist. And if you find a therapist and you're not really feeling like that's the best fit for you, it's okay to find someone else. Don't stop there. And so sometimes we have a tendency, or folks will have a tendency to not continue therapy if they didn't feel like they gelled with that first person, but keep going. There's the right clinician out there for you.
Let me pose a question to Simone. You're in the community dealing with trauma, and sometimes every day. I heard something the other day about the whole pandemic that we're dealing with. This person said, we're all in a huge storm, but we're all in separate boats. Mm-hmm. How can we get help in our individual boat?
Sure. So again, to repeat what Arnita said, it's a gambit of professional help out here, and we do recommend professional help. So the community hubs are beautiful, where you can be you and you can talk. But what we've been doing through programming is to try to educate people, even in salons, of where to send people, because we are all in different boats. Some of us are suffering from PTSD or depression. Some of us just need support for a little while. Some of us need long-term help. And so there's such a huge connection with all of us going through this pandemic, but everybody, especially when you talk about the differing of ethnicities and races and, socioeconomic backgrounds, everybody has a different boat that they're in. So I might not have a speedboat, or I might not have a yacht. I might be paddling, but there's some help for you as well.
That's good to know. Alfonso, you talk about mental health from a culturally conscious perspective. Is there a difference in dealing with the trauma associated with African Americans than in others? And who should we be looking for to help us deal with that?
I think it's important that, once again, I'm gonna go back to the higher learning institutions. I think they are doing many of us a disservice by not acknowledging the scholarly work that other ethnic groups have put forth. So in the context of that, I think our European family need to be exposed to African scholars who have done empirical research and have done the necessary, research to show that we, as the descendants of kidnapped and enslaved Africans, need a different form of a theoretical modality to deal with our circumstances. So there's Amos Wilson, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Marumba Ani, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Bobby Wright, just to name a few that I think will help individuals begin to understand the paradigm that is going to be needed to help us as we transition through this construct of dealing with internalized racism to improve our self-image, our self-worth, and our self-identity. So I think that's going to be critical as we move forward with helping individuals of every ethnic group come out of this pandemic.
Let's go back to Dr. Smith and see what he can start us off with. Kweku?
Well, you know what, when we think about this right here, you know, we talked about just the title, you know, how do we get past the pandemic? How do we get past structural racism? How do we just deal with day-to-day traumas? I'm dealing on top of that. So what I'd like to pose each of the panelists is just thinking about this. What are some of the issues going on specifically with COVID-19 that people need to know that they can be able to work through this difficult time? We'll start with Alfonso.
I think as it relates to the pandemic, and family, I'm gonna speak from a collective experience. I think a lot of times we want to individualize some of this conversation, and I'll let the two queens if they go individual, but I'm gonna talk from a collective perspective. The pandemic has exposed the disparities in the Black community that we are dealing with as a collective group of people. So I think it's critical that we understand the reality of we need the institutions to put some things in place to get more brothers and sisters who are to become attorneys, doctors, physicians, I'm gonna say psychologists and psychiatrists, because what's happening in our community, we don't have the enough professionals to provide the services that our community needs. So just like with the opiate pandemic, when the opium pandemic was acknowledged as a health crisis, legislation, laws, and policies were changed to address that pandemic. So with this, we are in the same, the crisis that is going on in the Black community is the same. So we need legislation and policies changed as with how institutions have created these discriminatory practices to keep us out of these spaces. We need for that to be addressed, for more African-American, more Latinos, and more Indigenous brothers and sisters can get these credentials so that we can provide services to our people.
Arnita, do you want to follow up on that as far as COVID-19? Again, what's another area that has affected our community specifically?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Alfonso said. And we have to be mindful of the fact that COVID-19 definitely disproportionately impacted the Black community. It has, since the beginning and continues to. And there are a number of reasons for that, right? And so when we look at our healthcare system, we look at, just some of the structural and systemic issues that lead to poor health outcomes for Black folk. That's a part of this underlying piece of, so why are so many Black people testing positive? Why are they dying at a higher rate? If we look at laws, and Alfonso said laws and policies, all of those things around redlining and who lives where and how close people live together, and a number of different things, and what kind of treatment we get when we go in for care. So we know that there are studies and there's plenty of information to show us that Black folk, when they go into the healthcare system, often are not believed or not taken seriously, do not get the additional care and that they need. And so if we know that, we want to work on from every front. On the front around policy and programs and pushing and changing things, we absolutely need to work there. But individually, we need to remember that we have to keep ourselves healthy. That's eating right, that's reducing the stress. And when we think about when it first came out around the symptoms for COVID-19, and there was this picture of like who was at risk or most at risk initially. And it was folks with underlying conditions. So of course, people that are a little, senior, and then people with underlying conditions. And the reality is, if you are Black living in America, you have an underlying condition, because when we think about racism and white supremacy and the chronic stress that it produces, stress is going to do a whole lot in your body, and it's going to affect a lot of your functioning, so whether that's high blood pressure and leading to heart disease, stroke, any of those things, you have an underlying condition. And so what do we need to do to take care of ourselves that we are prepared before any of these things hit? And when they do hit, if we're not prepared, we mobilize to take care of ourselves, as well as, our physical body, our mental well-being, all of that, while we continue to fight for change.
Simone, I want you to talk about COVID-19 and what it did to us from an economic standpoint. We know the income inequality, talked about not having those hubs that are those small businesses that need it, and what it did for us not to have those places to go to that brought us comfort.
Sure. Well, it was alarming for a lot of folks in the sense that they could not connect and could not get together in the way that normally feels good. To be face to face with somebody loves you, right? And cares about you, and you can get wise information. And so having to find new ways to figure out how to connect is hard. But economically, for Black and Brown folks to stay home from work in order not to spread the disease or not be connected was very difficult. And so a lot of Black and Brown people were in contact with folks who had symptoms or not, because we're learning so much more about COVID, right? Because they had to continue to go to work to feed their children, to pay their bills. There's not enough sustainable income set up aside so that we can be home for 2 or 3 months out of a year ever and still make bills and still be okay. And so economically, we suffered because we couldn't go out to work. And then we suffered socially and spiritually and mentally because we didn't have those hubs to go to at that time. And so then there's the increase in calls that everybody is kind of talking about. Sure.
When we think about, this pandemic, we said, wow, what could be worse? But then we already knew about racism being a public health issue. But then when George Floyd cried, mama, I think that put everybody in the world on alert. And Simone, I want to come right back to you right there. When you heard George Floyd cry out to his mama, this big 6'6" strong man call out for his mama while being brutally murdered in front of millions of people, not at the time, but afterwards, what went into your heart as far as not only for him, but for Black mothers across the world and the fears they have every day and that manifesting it?
It's so interesting that you said that. And I think sitting here in this moment, I'm reflecting on watching the video, which everybody, watched in their time or did not. But I remember when I heard him and saw him face to the ground, pressure on his neck, saying, mama. And for some reason, I knew in that moment that she wasn't still here on the earth. I too have lost my mother. And I don't know why that connected with me so much, but it connected with a lot of us. But for some reason, I knew that he was calling out to her spirit. And so that's one of the things that Dr. Watkins touched on and Arnita touched on, that we are a spiritual, connected people. And so in order to better understand us, you have to understand that part about us. And so at that moment when I heard it, not only did I cry for him, but all the other people that we do not know, for those of us that jumped off the slave ships in order not to go to a foreign place, that probably called out mama too, that probably said, I don't understand what I've done wrong. All I want to do is live and be free. But somebody is against that. So in that moment, I was angry and I was defeated and hurt and did not understand why nothing was happening to free him in that moment. How many times in our history has that happened? We can't count. So just to say, I connected with other women, of course. I cried, I talked to my son and the men that I love. And at that point, a mama, a woman, a dad, all of us just want to hold our loved ones and protect them. Nobody wants to ever know about that happening ever again, which is why the unrest is happening. Never again.
And so you talk about that unrest. And Arnita, what I want you to do is explain what was it that not only summoned Black people, but it seemed to summon people who normally don't gather in this. You had people saying all lives matter, and all of a sudden they could articulate that Black lives matter. What was it about that call from George that got a lot more people interested, not just from a local or national level, but even as a global phenomenon?
I think a part of it goes back to your question to Simone about him calling out for his mother. I saw people protesting, carrying signs that said when George Floyd called for his mother, he summoned all mothers. And that didn't have anything to do with race. That was something that made I'm sure that it made something rise up in other mothers, even of other races, of other tongues, of other nations, to say, if that was my baby. And hearing those voices, hearing that sound, and I think about me even watching him on that ground calling for his mother. That is not, you have to honestly, you got to be a different level of human to not feel anything. And so then those are the things that we think are abnormal, that you feel nothing around that. And so as a human race, people were stepping up and standing up and talking about the injustice there, because I think people felt that on a human level. And then of course, mothers felt it on that level, and then as a people, we're sick and tired of dying in the street. We are sick and tired of seeing our men, women, children, loved ones being taken at the hands of oppressive systems by police who have a motive that is not beneficial to that person or us as a people. We're tired. And so people got out in the streets. And I think the other piece of that is that the protests and the civil unrest has not died down. And so the fact that people are standing on, I feel this is real. We're not going to let this die and let it rest. And I think some people were waiting on it to die down, but when it didn't, I think there are other people that started to rise up like, okay, this is a thing. This is serious.
You know what, and I'm glad you do that, because it helps me transition to Brother Alfonso. And I want to thank you in advance for the service that you paid to this country, brother.
Yes.
You've done so many great things for this country. And like so many brothers who have served, to say to come back to a country who doesn't always appreciate you. Now, America has a strong defense system, and we pride ourselves on how strong our defense system is. In fact, America was built upon violence. So why is America so surprised that some of these peaceful riots, peaceful protests turn into uprisings and the violence comes out of it? Can you explain that to the people?
I don't know if America is necessarily surprised. I think they are aware. And when I say they, there's an element of our European family that is very hateful and just don't respect the humanism in other people. So when we had this conversation, we're not talking about all Europeans. We're talking about that there's an element amongst them. But from a historical perspective, America has continued to exploit and extort, take away from the masses of people. And I think the masses of people are fed up with the just the straight out disrespect for human life, straight out disrespect for the working man and woman. People are just fed up. So I think America this is a crossroad for the leadership in America to recognize that there has to be some decisions, some executive decisions made as how are we going to move forward in this country and make sure that everybody get their basic needs met, that everybody is able to, when I go into Walgreens, it's $3 for some deodorant. I mean, bread is $2 or $3, and people wages have not went up. So there's a level of frustration with the structure of racism, and it's showing across the board with how people are viewing this situation with watching that grown big Black man be done like that, and him not being able to defend or protect himself as a Black male. I mean, it just tore me apart to see that and not be able to help that brother. Or so once again, depending on where you at in your humanism, it's the challenge is now, how are we going to move forward?
What are some of the tips for grieving while in social isolation? How can people handle the grief process, which may be associated with family members or others, or just grieving because they feel bad? What can they do?
Yeah, you know what? And this is a beautiful question, because a lot of people were grieving before the pandemic and before this social injustice. And so what we've learned is from this pandemic, a lot of the things that we were doing wasn't necessarily healthy, but the pandemic has forced us to look at some of the things that we took for granted, that we didn't have. Before I left the house, my daughter made me this little thing right here. And what it was is we got a chance to sit down last night and just to do some little arts and crafts of stuff I'd never have time to get to do. And you said, what can we do for the grieving? Hold those people who are there just a little bit closer. Appreciate these moments, appreciate these times. And even for the people who are gone, as Sister Simone talked about her dear mother, to hold on to the memories and the words that was given to us. To be able to do both of those things allows us to live from the past and to build us up, but also to live in the present with these great moments that gives us the hope to sustain us for the future.
Simone, do you have anything to add to that?
I just love everything he said, because holding on to those loved ones is what counts. But I would also advise anybody that's grieving to reach out for help, which we mentioned earlier. There is help available. There are grief groups online. There are therapists that you can work with. There are even some family members in your family that are also grieving that you may not know about because you didn't open that window. And so I say, just tip that window open a little bit and yell out, I need help. And somebody will probably answer the call.
Are you finding that parents are listening to and finding a therapist for their children struggling with the disruptions in their lives that have been caused by coronavirus? Kids are out of school, they've been home all the time, and it's having an impact on children too. What can we tell the parents who are worried?
I think this is a very this is somewhat, I mean, this is to a certain extent, it's a blessing for parents to be able to spend this type of quality time with their children. So I think it's important that parents don't look at it through the lens of spending more time to nurture your seed. Sit down and talk and have real conversation with your children. Read a book to your children. Don't put them in front of TV. Take the phone from. Reading a book is very nurturing. It's a very comforting for you to hold your child and read a book to them, or for them to sit around you and they can touch you, lay on you, read the book, because that's part of when we talk about grieving. Love is a very healing attribute. Love is a very nurturing attribute as it relates to the touch, the feels, the hugs, the kisses on the forehead, the kisses on the cheek, to be told that I love you, I want the best for you. A lot of times parents don't get the time to do that. So I think looking at it through the lens of, once again, from a different perspective, to take this time to spend that quality time with your children. And once again, that is very helpful in these times.
Let me pose another question that we've gotten from the people who are watching. And this is one that I think all of us mothers can relate to. I know there are resources out there to help individuals. However, Black mothers are suffering. They're worried that if their sons are going to come home after going to the mall or going to the school or going to the store, are there support groups that will help those mothers deal with these concerns?
I don't know of any specific support group. I don't. Maybe the other panelists do, but I do know that our community hubs. We talk about that all the time, and we talked about it prior to George Floyd's death, because there were many before him. And we know brutality, police brutality, and specifically, is not only about the death of someone, but being pulled over, racial profiling, being taught to the wrong way, brutality from educators in school systems, brutality from neighbors or people in the community. So brutality looks different ways, from sexual abuse to domestic abuse, whatever. So the brutality that is surrounding our Black children and our Black boys is alarming. It's alarming. So for the mothers who are worried, I would say, please don't stay there waiting alone and worrying alone. Reach out for help. And hopefully we'll be able to add some resources later to give some people some information on how they can at least talk through that. Because that's something that I don't know if we will have an opportunity to stop talking about.
Here's another question from one of our viewers, and I think Dr. Smith, maybe you can take this one. What can we do to combat the feeling of helplessness?
You know what, that's a hard question, because we can give like a politically correct answer, but the real question becomes like, what do I do that can give me immediate relief? And the first thing what I tell people is this: if you wake up with breath in your body and you wake up with a conscious mind to be able to think, that's the first thing what we have to recognize, is that if I have breath, I have hope. And then what we've talked about all throughout this program, there is a resiliency within our people. When we look at what happened in 1619, we can say that we're nowhere where we need to be, but we've come so far away. So if we can activate that cellular DNA of hope, of courage, of strength for our people, and not only think about ourselves, but our posterity, our future generations, that gives you the hope. I think about, what if Queen Harriet wouldn't have did what she did, or Brother Malcolm, or Brother Medgar, or Brother Martin had given up? Where would we be? But it was because of the resilience, because of the strength of those individuals, where they didn't just think about themselves, but they thought about those who came before them. So I tell everybody, when you have that sense of helplessness, put your eyes back onto the past of the people who came before you. And oftentimes, not to shame anyone, but I say, what would your ancestors say to you with that? They would say, rest, because I know it's tough, baby. But also, let me touch you and let me bless you and kiss you with this spirit of hope and the strength to be able to carry on when you says there's nothing into you to carry on. In psychology, we talk about the power of positive thinking. And it's not just something that's wishful and whimsical. It's a cognitive restructuring of these neurons that make us believe it. So the more you say it, the more it becomes true. And the more the things come true and it manifests, the more it validates that you do have a power that you didn't think you originally had.
I'd like to add to that too, and just talk about what Dr. Kweku mentioned. Also waking up with that breath and that concept that I can think. Lay in the bed and start thinking about what you are grateful for in that moment. And that sometimes can trigger that brain and that synapses to say, hey, there's some hopelessness, but on the other side, I am grateful for shelter and breath and a new day and a new opportunity. And with this, I will do fill in the blank. And sometimes that action of your feet, giving back to others, volunteering in your community or in your home or wherever, that helps that helplessness when you start being actively talking back to the helplessness.
I love all of that. Everything Dr. Kweku and Simone just said is amazing. What another thing to add to that would be focus on what you can control, because we get lost in what we can't control, and that's what makes us feel helpless. Yes. What is it? And there's nothing too trivial, nothing too small or minuscule. If you can control which pair of shoes you put on today, focus on you're able to control that. You may not be able to go out and buy a 5-course meal, but I got some chicken wings and some hamburger meat. I'm gonna choose the hamburger meat today and make sloppy Joe. That was a choice that you made and you controlled it. And so you can build on that. And as you build on that, you start that locus of control, and our sense of what we're able to control or not starts to build, and it reduces the hopelessness, the helplessness.
I totally agree with that. I decided the other day that I was going to wash all the dishes in my sink. And when I got them finished, I felt great.
Yes.
So let's have everybody give us a short wrap up, some thoughts about some things you want folks to take with us when we leave each other this evening. Let's start with Simone.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking as you said that, and going back to being grateful. Yes, we are in a horrible pandemic, and we don't know. Really, there's just uncertainty. And so we use the word pandemic. We need to understand that people are afraid of uncertainty. Like Arnita was talking about that control. It's too much uncertainty going on in the world. So we're all really afraid. And so mindfulness as a practice and being in the moment. Right now, I'm breathing. Right now, I'm safe. Right now, I'm happy. Right now, I have access to all of the basic needs that I need. So not trying to figure out what next year is going to look like, because clearly we have no idea. So I just like to leave everybody with the idea of looking up and looking into or Googling what mindfulness and being in the moment is. And again, we took a class this morning on self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. love on yourself. Wrap your arms around yourself and squeeze tightly and say, I'm enough and I'm worthy. I am worthy. I am worthy.
Thank you, Alfonso. What are your final thoughts?
And once again, I'm gonna speak from a collective perspective. My experience with working and living here in Milwaukee, with Milwaukee being one of the worst places for African American family to be in, to be raised in, I'm requesting that our European family, that y'all get to a place where y'all can recognize that we are victims of environmental and social conditions that we did not create. These conditions that we live in are the conditions that we are being forced to live in. So I would like for leadership to meet with Black leadership, and let's have a real conversation about what is needed to change the conditions of the inner city of Milwaukee, and what policies needs to be changed, what legislation needs to be changed, what discriminatory loaning practices that have impacted the African American, where we don't get access to loans to take care of our properties. We need to start having some conversations about what type of manufacturing and industry jobs that can be brought to the city of Milwaukee, where Black men can be employed so they can take care of their families. So I would like for us to start having some real conversation for those who are ready to have a transition of not giving up the power, but just sharing the power or access to the resources.
Arnita, a thought to leave us with?
Yeah, that was great stuff. I'd say just remember you're not alone, that you are not in this alone. Give yourself some grace. Take rest and breaks as you need to. And I also like to let people remind people that everything we do and we are, and all of that is connected to relationship, and everything we need is connected to relationship. And so our relationships with our close others, with our family, our friends, our larger community, stay connected to folks that love you, that care for you, and that will hold you up when you're having a difficult time.
And Dr. Smith, we're going to give you the final word. What is the word?
2 words: self and others. Take care of yourself. The small things that we can control: how we eat, how we exercise, and getting proper sleep. And then others. And I say this every time, every place I go. Mama Daisy always told me the best way to heal yourself is to help others. So when we see these young babies out in the streets and they're fighting, let's give them some love. Let's do some things we can do to pour into them positively. Think about more than just yourself, but make sure you take care of yourself so you can take care of others.
Great words to take forward. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. I thank the panelists, and I thank you, the folks who are watching. I hope you got some inspiration from this conversation. I hope it was helpful, and I hope it was enlightening. For Black Nouveau and Milwaukee PBS, thanks for joining us. I'm Joanne Williams. Good night.
Ashe.